Good day. We are now going to discuss using a tool called Mininet. Mininet is essentially a tool that allows you to simulate entire networks within a small virtual machine, which is what is necessary to test networks without having to physically have to create these networks. Right. So this is a copy of Mininet slides. We will move towards going directly to the installation. So Mininet is basically a tool for prototyping networks. This is the website for the Mininet application itself, right? And this is where you can download the tool. So if we click through that, you will see the website of Mininet with the download instructions. We're going to be using a pre-installed VM, so that at least we don't have to configure and install the software ourselves. We're just going to use it. And the latest version is found here in releases. The current version is version 2.2.2, just released way back, and you can click on this to download it. Of course, in my case, I've already downloaded it, so there is no need to download it again. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to configure this tool using a virtualization tool called VirtualBox. So I already have VirtualBox here running. If you're not familiar with VirtualBox, there's another tutorial on how to get VirtualBox running. But for you guys, you can simply follow these instructions and you should be fine. Now, please install the appropriate VirtualBox version for your operating system. In my case, I'm using Linux. That's why this is the Linux version. But if you're using Windows, you should use the Windows version. The instructions will roughly be the same and the user interface will be the same. So you shouldn't have any major problems at least configuring this. Okay, so let's create a new virtual machine. Let's call it Mininet 2.2.2. Okay, the default directories are actually fine. Yes, it is an Ubuntu-based distribution. I recommend you give it 2 gig of RAM. Right? If you have it, you give 2 gig is recommended, although 1 gig will actually work. Right? Then click on this, use existing virtual hard drive. Now, when you downloaded that Mininet installation a while ago, there would actually be a virtual hard drive. So let's point to it, click here. So it's not here by default. So click add. It should be in the downloads directory. And it's uncompressed here. So you should see Mininet VM x86-64 VMDK. Right, that's the VMware virtualization format. Right, that should be found here. Select it. And that's it. So now I have a ready to configure Mininet VM. Now, one thing that I recommend you add also is this. Click on Host Network Manager. This is not here by default, so let's just pretend to remove it for now. So I'll create one, right? And just use whatever default value is there. The reason why this is important, and click Enable DHCP Server. The reason why this is important is because you want to be able to connect to your virtual machine from your host machine. So your computer right now is called the host machine. The virtual machine is also called the guest machine. This allows you to create a separate network interface for connecting to that. And just make sure you click here, DHCP server, enable. Once you're done, you go to the settings, right? Go to network. So the default network configuration of the first interface will be NAT. That means your guest operating system will use your host operating system to connect to the internet, since we need internet access. Although for this class, your VM does not require internet access, but it's okay to configure it so that it works. Then the second interface, you enable it and select host only adapter and select the VBox net, which was created a while ago. Default values are fine, and that is it. So what happened right now is your virtual machine will now see 2 network interface cards. One that connects to the internet, and the other that is only visible by the guest machine, so that the guest machine can connect to it. Okay, now let us start and boot the machine by clicking start. So here you will see, so this warning here is keyboard capture. So for example, if I put my mouse inside, you notice the mouse is gone. So the keyboard capture key is actually the right control in my system. So the right control, I press it and I get my mouse back. So the mouse can go in, right control, I get my mouse back. So this is how to retrieve your mouse. So you can see here, this is the default, escape key, so that the mouse can be inside the system and can be outside the system, right? So while the system is booting, we're basically running a virtual machine that is already that has Mininet 2.2.2 pre-installed, right? So it is an Ubuntu machine that can get rid of the warnings. And now you can log in. The default username is Mininet, and the default password is password. So you now see a system. To test quickly if Mininet is working, type sudo mn test ping all. So that means whatever virtual network topology I create, all hosts should ping all hosts. And ping is a command used to test networks. And topology is single 3. That means I have a single switch with 3 hosts connected to it. So you notice Mininet here creates your network. It adds a controller, adds 3 hosts, connects it to one switch, right? And it creates the virtual links there, configures the hosts by default, gives it IP addresses and the like, which we will be discussing in a future topic, and does ping from host 1 to host 2 and 3, from host 2 to 1 and 3, and so on and so forth. So this one tells us that Mininet is working. Now the problem you see right here is that the text and the font is not very nice, and I can't do copy paste, so it's very difficult. So what you can do is you can get the IP address of your host only interface. So here you will see Ethernet 0 and okay, to resume where we left off. So basically we need to be able to boot or load the second interface of the network interface card, which was not booted. So you can do that by editing a file called etc/network/interfaces, right? We use the tool, so just to exit a bit, we use the tool called VI, which is basically a text editor in Linux, and sudo, which basically makes me a system administrator. Because this is a system related configuration file, you have to use VI to configure it, right? So if you notice, only the first interface, which is ETH0, is started up by default. So I also want to start up the second interface, so I say auto ETH1, which is the second interface. Then I face ETH1, configure it using DHCP, meaning it pulls the IP address from a server, which in our case is the host operating system. You will learn more about DHCP in a future class, right? After that, you can sudo reboot. So again, sudo is you execute the command as root, and reboot to restart the entire system. While the system is rebooting, what I just typed a while ago, sudo is basically a command. So even though you're running your system as a regular user, which I logged in as the user Mininet, that is not super user, I can run super user commands by putting sudo in front of the command. So which is what I did when I edited the file using VI, and which is also what I did when I rebooted the machine. So sudo vi/etc/network/interfaces to edit the interface file. Now that etc network interface file is basically a file that provides you a mechanism to configure the network interfaces in your Linux machine. Although this is a networking class and not really a system administration class, if you do take your operating systems or system administration class, you should be able to cover that topic as well. Okay, so we'll just wait a bit more until the system boots and we should be done. Now you can log in again using your Mininet user, right? Password Mininet, IPA. Notice I now have an ETH0 with an IP address 10.02.15, which is the IP address of my Wi-Fi at the house. So you can ignore that for now. That just allows this machine to connect to the internet. And the second interface, ETH1, which is a 192.168.56.4 IP address. That is an IP address between my VM, which is my guest machine, and the host machine. Now let's try to connect to it using a command line tool. So for here, this is my Linux machine. Of course, you can use in Windows, you will be using a tool called PuTTY in order to connect remotely to your VM. But mine, since I'm using Linux, and for those of you who are Mac users, you actually have a command line tool called SSH by default. Right? So this is secure shell, is connects to your VM securely. So SSH Mininet at 192.168.56.4 was the IP address we got when we looked at the IP configuration. By the way, that command IP space A means list all IP addresses of that VM. Now I can connect to my Mininet machine. If this is the first time you're connecting, you'll get a warning. Just say yes. Here, I connected it the second time, so there's no more warning. Type my password Mininet, and it should be fine. Now, the nice thing about this interface is you can highlight things, you can copy paste. So let us look at our tutorial a while ago. Let's try this command, for example. This is the test command a while ago. Right, I ran, and I can paste it. In the Mininet console, you can do that using your PuTTY or using SSH. But if you were using your VirtualBox, the console GUI of the VirtualBox, you can't copy paste, you can't even highlight, so it's not very useful. So in this case, you notice I was able to copy paste the command, which is quite useful. So this again creates a single topology, 3 hosts connected to one switch, connected to each other, and I ping host 1 pings 2 and 3, host 2 1 and 3, host 3 1 and 4. Right? I can try other examples. So for example, here, Minimal creates 2 hosts with 1 switch. If you notice, if you do not put a test command, it basically sets up the topology and hands it over to you. And notice you're in the Mininet command line, so you can type help to get some help on commands. So let's try h1 ping h2, Control C to stop, h2 ping h1, and Control C to stop. Okay? The previous slide actually shows you some of the commands. Here are some of the commands that you can type. I think dump is the most useful. It will tell you what the topology looks like. So you only have 2 hosts connected to 1 switch with 1 virtual controller in the switch. Now let's try another more complicated topology. Okay, let's try this. There's a fan out example here. Right, so fan out means you have a switch, 2 switches, and 4 hosts connected to the 2 switches. Let's paste that here. If you dump the topology, you can see I have 4 hosts and I have 3 switches. And connected to my switch 1 is switch 2 and 3. Right, so switch 1 has 2 interfaces, and switch 2 has 2 interfaces with 2 hosts connected to it. Right, and switch 3 has 2 hosts connected to it as well. Right, so you can see the interfaces that are there. You can type net to see what is connected to what. So the interface of the host 1 is connected to switch 2, and another one connected to host 2 connected to switch 2, host 3 connected to switch 3, host 4 connected to switch 3. Then you have the switches. Here you see switch 1 connected to switch 2 and switch 1 connected to switch 3. If I type ping all, it will try to test h1, 2 and 3, 2, 3, 4, h2, 1, 3, 4, 3, 1, 2, 4, and so on and so forth. Now if you go back here, there are many examples that you can try out. Right? These are the topologies. You can also try it in code if you don't want in interactive mode. So let's take this example. VI is a popular text editor. So let's call this linear Python. Okay. So this creates a topology, a linear topology. Let's just fix it up a bit. Okay. So this is, if you're not familiar with Python, this is what Python looks like. Right? There you go. So this is a command. So this loads the libraries, creates a topology called linear 4, meaning 4 hosts connected into a linear topology. Start, does the ping all test, and stop. I can make it executable. If I run it by default, it doesn't work because Mininet must always run in root. That's why I have to put sudo in front. See, so it created a topology and it ran the ping all and it quit. So this is what we call non-interactive version. You create a program to do this test. As part of your exercise, your lab exercise, you will be using Mininet to simulate some networks. Okay? So hope that was useful and have a good day.